Welcome to the Life Issues podcast. My name is Helen Lea, and today we are exploring something that is very close to my heart, as I have my own story about this issue, and that is of eating disorders. I'm joined this week by Di Archer, who is co-founder of the charity Taste Life UK. Welcome along to Life Issues, Di.
Thank you, Helen. Really good to be here. Thank you.
And we're going to start off by hearing a bit of your story and why you're so passionate about speaking into something that is so often shrouded by secrecy, shame, misconceptions. But I feel a little bit of a nudge to share a little bit about why I am quite passionate about this myself. As I mentioned, I have my own experience with this. And as I was preparing for today's Life Issues recording, I was thinking through the questions and all the research that's been done. And I just felt I really need to be honest and share a bit of my story. Because some listeners may know a little bit of me with being on UCB1. And I have mentioned in the past that I have struggled with an eating disorder. And Di, that was bulimia. It started in my early 20s when I first tried this. And I'm aware it's something that is hard to discuss. And I'll be honest, I don't remember the first time I did it. I remember why. I was feeling very low. I was not happy in my body. And somebody I knew very well had been doing it, but keeping it a secret from me. And I didn't start straight away, but it was something that I did develop when my life took a turn that wasn't what I was hoping. I was disappointed. It became something that then I did do every now and again, but it quite quickly, I think, became something that wasn't about food. And I think we're going to go into this in a bit in the conversation, but actually was, for me, I realised looking back now, and I am aware of the trigger still, is it was a coping mechanism because I was really struggling with my mental health and it was a way of control. And it became something that was so secret that I was, if you'd have said to me, Helen, we know there's something not right and you're behaving in a way, or I'd have said no. I was so in denial because I was so ashamed, but I was also in that mindset that I wasn't affecting anybody else. So I'm not going to go into the whole story. I've given you a bit there. God has been good and has helped me through my mental health journey where I was quite poorly for a while. And it's something that I wanted to share because as a Christian, my faith became something real whilst I had an eating disorder. And it didn't just stop automatically as soon as Jesus became my Lord and Saviour through faith. It actually, I still had this eating disorder kind of going on while I was journeying in faith. And I think then it increased the shame because I thought I shouldn't be doing this. I knew it was wrong. And it took me a lot longer than I've heard other stories shared about coming through an eating disorder. You know, I hear some people saying a couple of years. Mine was decade. You know, it was a long time of secrecy. And I wanted to start off sharing that, Di, and I don't want to take up too much of the time, but really just so that you know that you're speaking to somebody that's not coming at it from a outsider's point of view, but from someone who's got still the scars and still the awareness of triggers and working through some of those areas in my life that were really broken, and a real heart to help people who are struggling with this as well. So that's my bit of my story. But Di, I'd really love to hear more about why you're passionate about speaking into eating disorders.
Well, Helen, thank you. Thank you for being so honest. That is such a helpful thing because I think there's so much about eating disorders that people don't want to think about. And there's so much misunderstanding out there, and unless you've actually had a brush with it one way or another, then I think eating disorders are what you said, a bit of a mystery. And just in your story there, I feel like you touched on so many of the things that are really important about eating disorders, and most especially how deeply personal an experience it is. I think from the outside, it's so easy to think that, well, why doesn't that person just stop?
Yeah.
So if there's struggling with not eating, it's so easy to think, well, why don't they just eat? Or if they're eating too much, why don't they just stop eating so much? All of that kind of stuff. If they're doing what the behavior that you were doing, where you're getting rid of food, having eaten it, it's like, well, why would you do that? I can't believe how much you just encompass, because you talked about, I think from outside it looks like an eating disorder is about the behavior,
Yeah.
but what you're doing with food, but inside it isn't that, is it? And you just touched on that. You talked about mental health, you talked about life struggles, you talked about coping mechanism. And I think you sounded about all the talked about a lot of things that I've had to learn, because I haven't had an eating disorder. But you sound a bit like my daughter, because the reason that I know about eating disorders is because our eldest daughter, who was around about 19 at the time, unbeknown to us, had developed similar behavior, sort of bulimic behavior, that was kind of mixed with anorexia. So she wasn't eating enough and she was getting rid of what she was eating. So, but we didn't know that. She was at uni. We didn't really know. And I knew nothing about eating disorders before this happened to our family. I thought all of the common things that so many people, think, but actually they are they are a big issue in the UK now, and COVID has sort of, the numbers are exploding, something I never expected to happen, because when it happened to our family, it was like, what on earth is this? So the first thing we knew was that I had a phone call from America, where my daughter was on holiday, and it was from an American hospital saying they had our daughter, and that she was alive, but her life was hanging by a thread, because she had been eating so little and getting rid of what she was eating so much that she depleted her body of potassium, and put her heart in danger. And if it wasn't for God's intervention at that point, we wouldn't have her now, because she was staying with a Christian nurse friend who knew the symptoms of potassium deficiency and basically marched her to hospital and said, you're probably going to hate me for the rest of your life, but I'd rather you were here to hate me. And so the first that we knew was that there was a doctor saying your daughter ought to be in a coma, because she has, just got rid of all of the electrolytes she needs. But so we're giving her potassium and you need to come and get her. So that kind of tipped us into the deep end of eating disorders, and we knew nothing. And suddenly there was this kind of, literally we were underwater, uncharted territory, out at sea. None of us knew what to do. It was the summer, and lots of the services that would normally be around were not available to us, and we turned to the NHS for help. Now I love the NHS with a passion, for lots of different reasons. Lots of my family work for the NHS and do so, and we have family members who wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. But I think in those days, and this was a while ago now, it was 10 years ago or so, the area that we were living in, the eating disorder services were rightly prioritised on those who are most ill, and they have their criteria. I totally understand that, and we work with the NHS now as a charity. So, but at that moment, partly because of the timing, there just wasn't what we needed at the time. And our mainstay was really a friend of ours who had been through the same experience with her two daughters, in fact, and was just like our rock. She was in the same church we were in, and she was like, look at my daughters, they have recovered. Because all that I knew about eating disorders was that, people could die.
Yeah.
So we were filled with fear, but our friend Jean was like, come on, we're going to trust God and we are going to look after your daughter together. So that was kind of like our sort of baptism by fire, if you like, into eating disorders. And we discovered two things, I guess. One, that they're hell on earth. not just for the person who is directly affected, but also for family and friends. And the reason for that is because you can't fix it. It's not like
Mm,
measles or a broken leg or something like that. You as a parent or a friend, you cannot fix it for someone else. Um, and uh, and it's scary stuff.
mm,
And you feel like you've kind of lost the person that you used to know. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the second thing that we discovered was that help and understanding is limited. I mean, it's still true now, because eating disorders are under researched, under resourced, underfunded, and during the years that we've been working as a charity, we've discovered many parents in particular, have had very difficult experiences in trying to find help because of that, and they're
mm.
kind of bewildered and angry. I don't feel that about the NHS, but I do feel about it's about eating disorders,
Yeah.
because I'm permanently angry about them.
And we're going to pick up on some of those points you made, some really important points there. I want to ask you, as a mother, when I was in a very dark place and was really struggling with my eating disorder, but it was so beyond shame that it was denial,
Yeah.
and it was so secret. I didn't think anyone knew, whereas it
Yeah.
turns out they did. I couldn't talk to my mum at that time. It
Yeah.
was I was ashamed, and I didn't know. Didn't want to think beyond kind of what it was, and for me, it was about dealing with that moment of coping. I never was thinking about the consequences, what it was doing to my body and my mental health, because that's the irony of it, right? My mental health was poor. I was using a coping mechanism which was making my mental health even worse. But I want to know, as a mother, how you were able to talk to your daughter. I mean, you shared there your daughter it was brought to your attention because of the medical
Yeah.
immediacy. But how did your relationship develop in that stage when she was first being honest with you about it? How did you talk about it?
I think we were right at the beginning. I think we were, as a family, including her, completely bewildered by the whole thing. Yes, she had a high level of embarrassment, and shame, because she also denial is part of the issue. And you're right, eating disorders begin as they look like a solution to the problem, because the psychological and the physiological effects make you feel better in the moment. And your systems kick in to whether whatever you're doing with food behavior, it's giving you a benefit, because it's doing something for you. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. So it makes you feel better in the moment. But I think what you said, that the in the moment thing is a real difference between the person who's affected and those around them, because it's like, for the person who is affected, it is moment by moment. It's like they're in the grip of it.
Mm,
It's really hard for them to look ahead, as you have just identified. Whereas for the person outside, it's like, where might this go? What are the consequences? Can't you see that if you don't eat, you're not going to have energy? All of that kind of stuff. And it's like the person, my daughter once described it as, it would, and I found this actually quite helpful. It was like she was enclosed in this glass bubble, really thick, distorted glass. She couldn't see out, and I couldn't see in. And it was like she was stuck inside. She didn't know how to get out. I didn't know how to get in. It was really difficult to hear each other as well through this thick glass. But I always felt, as a mum, that the hammer to break the glass was on the inside. I didn't have one. She had it. How could I, that, and I think that's one of the deep frustrations, is how do I empower? How do I encourage? How do I help her? So the talking thing, we had to find different ways of talking. I don't know. It was hard. I mean, I found that maybe a note on her pillow, or we would just a text, or something in her bag as she went out the door, was much more effective than actually trying to
mm.
talk. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that's really helpful, actually. Yeah. And what you described for your daughter, that really resonates. I would have described when I had my triggers, it was like I went down a slide, but it was like the lights went dark, so I couldn't. It's so
Yes.
weird saying it because you're like, well, just don't do that. But it's not as simple as that, because in the psychological, you've made that, it's like a slide. I've already gone down the slide and you almost accept, right, well, I'm going down it now. And then funnily, and I think, again, we'll pick up on this, is that as soon as I did the behaviour, straight after, shame, regret. I'm never doing that ever again. What have I done? And it's incredible how this slide that you're on in
Yeah.
darkness, as soon as you've
Yeah.
done it, you're in the light again, and you are. Well, I was filled with just remorse, regret, and then I'd beat myself up mentally.
Yes.
I would
Yeah.
speak such negative words over myself.
It's a vicious circle, isn't it? Yeah.
Vicious circle. So you've clearly embarked on the journey with your daughter of helping her recover. And then you said you had to learn a lot. It was something new. And as you mentioned, you were coming out from the outside. Tell us a bit more about that journey of caring. You mentioned the help available from the wonderful NHS wasn't sufficient a decade ago. It's still not now. There is, I know, an improvement. There's more measures, there's more funding. Slowly there is more research and understanding. But talk to us a bit about what you've learned. And then I know this is also why you've set up Taste Life. This is not just about raising awareness, but it's a place to really help people to learn.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose just to start backwards, really. I suppose it was partly this friend Jean, and partly within weeks, we had learnt more about eating disorders than the person, the psychologist that we spoke to, because that person had never had any training on it or teaching. Whereas we were highly motivated, obviously, because we want to help save our daughter's life. So within weeks, I knew far more, as did my husband. And so we were looking all over the world and talking to our friend who's an eating disorder counsellor. Jean worked as an eating disorder counsellor about all of this. And we realised very quickly that there was this like huge gap in knowledge and in understanding in general public, but also within a lot of medical services. So as our daughter began to recover, so the steps that she took to recover were definitely to do with learning, because there's something about having to understand how you got to the top of the slide. You talked about a slide. Why did I end up on that slide? Why was I even on it? How did it even begin? And we realized very quickly that it is, as you have already pointed out, it's a mental health thing. It starts with what you think rather than what you do. And that we're all vulnerable. I mean, I haven't had an eating disorder, but I've had other stuff. I've had some wonderful counselling over the year, because we all have stuff. We're human beings. We're all vulnerable, and we all have coping techniques. And it might have been like I read voraciously when I was a kid, and I loved it. But I also reckon it was an escape from some of the things that were difficult, because we all, life is tricky. And one of the good things I think about now is that we're actually allowed to say that.
Yeah.
We're allowed to say life is difficult, life is tricky, and we have to help each other find ways to cope. So part of the inspiration, I think, behind setting up the charity and setting up something that is, we were trying to fill the gap. What was it that we wanted that we didn't have? What was it that when we were struggling with trying to help to understand what had happened, how had this happened? And I think our daughter would say there were things in her past and things that had happened to us as a family, things that had come in beyond our control, that she'd never really sorted, never processed, that had contributed to insecurity in life, and things that had happened in her teens as well. We gradually began to understand the impact of these. Now, that doesn't mean just because difficult things happen to you or in you or around you, doesn't mean to say you get an eating disorder. It just means that you're going to be possibly more vulnerable to some kind of coping technique, and people have all sorts of ones. It's not like 1 + 1 = eating disorder at all. There's no emotional equations here, but we began to see how it might have made her vulnerable, and I guess perhaps the same might be true for you.
Yeah.
That there's a vulnerability there, maybe.
Absolutely. You've explained it so well, but when you realize this isn't just me. I mean, mine was definitely partly escapism, and you mentioned about your reading, but mine was as you mentioned, some of the things from my past, some of the negative experiences, things that I was confused by and I just didn't know how to deal with, led me to, it was many factors, and it was definitely an insecurity around my physical appearance, which is what we often focus on, but that wasn't it solely. Because I came from a family where I was loved unconditionally, I was a happy kid. There was nothing obvious in my background. And I think we'll go on to talk about this a little bit more, but definitely influences when I was a child. There wasn't social media, but there has always been, glossy magazines, adverts, films, things that, tell you should look a certain way or you're not good enough. So I listened to lots of different influences. But yes, I think the way you described it, it's not 1 + 1 = eating disorder, is really helpful because it's so not simplistic, which I suppose speaks into the difficulty then around how we help people. Because if it is a broken leg or a really bad disease, as hard as that is, there is treatments and there is an understanding of how we sort this. But when it's something so complicated and so personal to the person, like an eating disorder, it's hard to know where to begin. But you definitely nailed the fact that when you are able to say or understand this is I'm coping. I'm using this as a coping mechanism. It's a behavior to something that goes deeper rather than just focusing on the behavior. That's the key to start the process of recovery.
So what we've done with the Taste Life course, so one our kind of flagship as a charity is the Taste Life Recovery course. It's a community course. We run it online, we run it face to face. We train people, accredit them with university accreditation to run this course. And it literally tries to take on board everything you've just said. So it's like taking people on a journey to understand how they got to the top of the slide, what contributing factors might be, what eating disorders are and why they're so, because they have an addictive nature to them. So why it is you can't just wake up in the morning and think, oh well, I'm not going to do it anymore, like you said earlier, and then how to start taking the tiny steps out of it and back into life again. So and the courses that we run are not just for those who are affected directly, but also for family and friends. We're the only people who are doing something like this, so it's our unique selling point, if as it were, because we can see it affects everybody and that you need the support. I mean, if you could kick an eating disorder on your own, then you would. You need some support somehow, somewhere. So that's what we've created, is a bit of a journey for people to understand those things that you've mentioned, understand how difficult experiences affect you and what impact that might be having. But all of that is not just for the person struggling, because it's always in relationship. We are always in relationship. We're created for a relationship, whether it's family or friends or husband or wife or whatever. So everything that we do is for everyone, so that people who are on the outside, like me, can understand a bit more about what it might feel like to be on the inside. And we talk about what's helpful and what's not helpful, and we don't actually talk about food behavior until session 7, I think.
Wow.
Because it isn't really about food, as you have said. It's life, emotion.
I feel we need to go there further. I feel we need to go deeper there, because I know when I was in the worst of it, it was the food issue that I was so ashamed about.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think there are so many misconceptions still around eating disorders, and I'm aware we're using the term to describe a number of different eating habits, because they often all are around food, hence the word eating disorder. But can you help us understand a bit more then about how it's not about food?
Well, certainly this was an ongoing conversation between daughter and me about, because I'd be saying, I don't think it is about food. And she said, yes, it's about food. I think about food all the time. I think about it all the time. I can't think about anything else. And I'm like, but that's the whole point, because you're thinking about food all the time. You're not thinking about the things that actually started this off. So hence food looks like a solution, but actually it just adds, in the end, it adds to the problem, because then you've got, it's like, it's a coping mechanism. It's a defense mechanism. You're protecting yourself against something that is difficult to face. So you're thinking about food all the time. And I suppose every session that we do, we have a recovery story on video that we show people. And it's often the thing that people remember, because we all remember stories better than anything else, don't we? And I remember we have one video of my daughter, and she says, the thing, it was like I would feel something, but I would not allow myself to feel it. I would just eat and throw up. And what I had to learn how to do was, one, allow myself to feel feelings, and then work out what I was going to do with those feelings that was different to food behavior. And that's a kind of principle with all sorts of things, isn't it? It's like whether you turn to, alcohol or obsessive exercising, or also, it's a similar principle. It's an emotion that we have to learn how to feel and express in appropriate ways, rather than in unhelpful, addictive, inappropriate ways. Just on that note, I mean, I think that is the kind of the nub of it, really. But I think for people with eating issues, they often feel that they are different to those with other addictive behaviors, because you can avoid drugs. I know how hard that is. You can avoid alcohol, ditto. I know how hard it is. I'm not minimizing any of that, but you cannot avoid food. So it's a slightly different process. You have to retrain, you have to relearn your relationship with food. I felt like with her, we had to go right back to the beginning. She was literally almost, I was pureeing food, almost like she had to relearn how to eat, right back to babyhood in a way, and do that journey again. I think that's partly why, part of the complexity that you were talking about, because you're having to deal with two things at once. You're having to deal with retraining your food behavior, as well as looking at the things underneath that have got you there at the top of the slide in the first place.
It's so helpful what you've shared, and it resonates with me, both things there, allowing yourself to feel and retraining. And on the retraining of eating, of understanding food, for me, I'm going to be completely honest. This conversation, I've gone honest, and I'm going to continue with the honesty. When I developed body dysmorphia, so I would look at myself and I would just see the bits I didn't like. I'd see fat when there wasn't, it was curves. It was just being a woman. I'd feel it. I'd eat food and I'd actually feel my body growing, which is, it sounds ridiculous, but it was so unhealthy, this relationship I had with food. But like you say, I couldn't get away from it. And I love food. Like I've grown up cooking. I've, enjoy eating out with friends when I was able to. And, it was this secret behavior more and more, because you're having to eat and pretend that it's all okay. But something that I think really helped me is learning to love food again in a way that I'm now passionate more than ever about learning, like, the benefits of food, the nutrition. And as a Christian, learning, like, God created the world, and when he made food, like many other things on the planet, we learn it through different herbs, and medicines often come from nature. Like, there's so much good in food. And you mentioned it with your daughter was lacking in potassium, this vital chemical, because it comes from food. And now, a way that I have to be aware of my triggers. I'm definitely not now acting in that behavior, but I am aware of, after doing it for so long, that there can be still triggers that can try and get me to that slide again, the top of the slide. But when I actually celebrate food and enjoy the benefits of it, it's completely changed my mindset. But that didn't happen overnight. That was a long learning journey. I will just respond on what you said about allowing feeling, because I actually welled up when you said that, because that's actually something I've only learned maybe in the last couple of years. Going through counselling, and the counsellor, I remember saying to me, we talked about something from my childhood that was a painful thing. It was actually being at school and feeling quite stupid. And she said, "How do you feel?" And I said, "Anxious. I felt hot. I felt pain. I didn't like it." And she went, "Just stay there a minute. Just feel it." And it was awkward being with this counsellor over Zoom, because we weren't in person. And she made me just sit in it and, like, encourage me just to feel. And I just sat there thinking, "Oh Lord, what to just get through this." And then after about a minute or two, which felt like half an hour, she said, "How do you feel now?" And I said, "Oh yeah, not as strong as it was a minute or two ago." And she said, "See, what happens is when you actually acknowledge the feeling, when you're able just to be aware of it, you don't have to accept it and go, 'That's it now. My life's going to feel this way.' But there's something that happens in allowing yourself to feel and not just running through it, because that's when, as we've talked about already, you can slam it shut, apply a coping mechanism over the top of it, and you never actually work through what that pain was. And like in life, when you apply oxygen and light to things, they heal. And I think it's the same with our past experiences and pain. So I'm probably taking us into another life issues podcast conversation, but I think acknowledging pain, seeing that pain is not always wrong. Well, actually, it's not wrong. It's telling us to be aware of something that has caused the pain, not to run from pain, but know that you can work through whatever it is, and there is ways of healing and dealing with that pain.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Yeah, exactly. And it's like such a. I think for many of us, we pick things up, possibly as children, unhelpfully. I thought it was wrong to be angry. That's what I picked up from my family. I mean, I now look back and I'm an adult and think, I don't know how I managed to think that, but somehow I picked that up. It was wrong to be angry. And that's been a life journey for me, learning how to, exactly what you said. Okay, oh my gosh, I am actually feeling this. And learning actually how useful that is and how important it is and how it points out things that need to be pointed out, whether it's, stuff in me or especially for like eating disorders. I'm permanently angry about eating disorders, so I think that's really profound. And could I also just go back to what you were saying about the shame thing? Because one of the things that one of our big aims on the Taste Life course is to lift some of that from people, because it's it in some ways it doesn't need to be there, because like I said, we all have stuff and we live in a really complicated society as far as food and food behavior and what you eat and what you don't and how you're supposed to look and all this kind of stuff. We have made it really pressured, really complicated, and to know what to eat, how to eat, even without an eating disorder. And it changes every month, So it's one of the things we're really keen to try and lift off people. We all have stuff, we all have things that happen, and trying to just lift that off. And I think especially, I mean, I'm a churchgoer, I'm a Christian, but for some people, they can easily pick up the message that there's something really sinful in this food behavior thing you're doing. And I don't think it is at all. It's actually, making it's just a coping technique. It's just unhelpful, and it's actually making you really, really miserable. Really, it's not taking you anywhere helpful. And all of those things are completely the opposite to how God wants to treat us, how much he loves us, how he is actually for us. He is always on our side. He wants us to have fullness of life. Our theme verse for Taste Life comes from the Gospel of John, who knew Jesus, and it's John 10:10. Jesus said, "I've come that you may have life, and life in all its fullness." And that's what it's about. So I just think that that God wants to meet us in wherever we are. I wonder if I might tell a very brief story about that happened to my daughter when she was at the depths, right at the beginning of her eating disorder. We were at a Christian summer festival called New Wine that some people will know about. And there's these wonderful meetings and there's loads of wonderful music and singing and it's all great. And we dragged our daughter along, and she was sitting there in the middle of, thousands of people thinking, I can't relate to any of this, because I think her faith had got really, really small. And she had this picture. She's a very visual person. And she said she was sitting there thinking, I've had enough. I can't do it. I can't recover. I'm exhausted. It's too much. I just want to let go and probably die. I can't see any way out of any of this, the darkness. And she said she had a sort of picture in her mind of herself flat on the floor in the dirt and the muck and the mess and the discomfort and the pain that she was in. And she couldn't move. And she saw in this picture thing in her head some feet walking towards her. And she thought, oh, crikey, what is this? If this person tries to make me get up, if it's one of these other well-meaning people, like my parents who are trying to make me better, forget it, I'm done. But this person came right up to her, sat down next to her, and then laid down next to her, right close to her, and then put his face in the mud and the dirt and the mess with her. And then he turned his face to her and said, "Whenever you're ready." And for her, that was like the deepest, experience she'd ever had of God. And that he came to meet her where she was. God doesn't ask us to get to him. The whole point of Christian faith is that he comes to where we are. And that was like number one turning point for her.
It took me so long to get there. And I think what you said around sin, I don't think I've even given myself, even now, the freedom or the permission to think that. But you're so right. And actually, it's like I'm my own worst enemy. I've let myself down, and whenever I did it afterwards, I just used to give myself the worst time. I didn't need anyone else to tell me I was doing something wrong. I was just on my own back and hated myself for so long. And I had an experience where, similarly, actually, it was a Christian festival. And I'd gone through like the cycle again of doing it and having a big gap without doing it, my coping mechanism of bulimia. And then I'd did it again, and it just felt like I'm just not able to progress in this recovery. And I remember a lady praying for me, and I think it was the first time I was able to be honest, because sometimes I'd go and get prayer, but I'd never really tell them why. I just wanted to be freed from something. And she essentially told me what your daughter experienced in that moment, where God is with me when I'm doing it, and isn't and not angry at me. He's just there with me. And I tell you, as a Christian, until you realize that, you're never going to, I think, receive the fullness of life that you talked about, that Jesus wants to give us, because you will always feel like you're not good enough. And that's the whole purpose of Jesus coming to us, right? None of us are. We can never reach God on our own. We need God to come to us, and we receive that gift of grace, which is unconditional love. I want to encourage you to check out tastelifeuk.org to find out more about this course of recovery and how you can train in it if this conversation has stirred you, or maybe you're in the thick of just feeling like, I don't see a way out of it. Well, you don't have to, but you can receive that support where you're at and just take one day at a time is my encouragement. I want to pick up on what you shared around the promise from Jesus to bring us fullness of life, because something that I've learnt is that when we're struggling with an eating disorder, it's not just your body that becomes deficient in the nutrients it needs. Your mental health, your emotional health, your body, mind, soul and heart, all the things that make us a human are affected by it. And that's something that I didn't realise. It was always a physical thing, I was restricting the calories. I was getting rid of the food. I didn't realise the negative impact it was having on my mental health and on my emotional health. And we've touched on the fact that often these behaviours come from a place of pain and as a coping mechanism, as a response to mental ill health. What does it mean to live in fullness of life? And what is the potential of faith to contribute towards recovery?
Great question. Great question. I think that this is a bit of a twofold answer in some ways, because you talked about how we deplete ourselves very easily, I think, of what we need. I can remember someone, so as a charity, we go to events and so on, and we have a stand and we talk to people. And I can remember one older teenager saying to me once, she said, I am in recovery from not eating enough, from anorexia. She said, I'm doing really well. And she said, the thing that has surprised me is that I can now think again. She said, it was almost like when I started to eat healthily, balanced, then she said, it was like I had holes in my brain. And now that I am eating properly, healthily, then these holes, I can feel them filling up and making my brain will make connections. And she said it was almost like there were holes. And I think actually that's quite a really good description, because that is what happens. Because you're depriving your body of what it needs to work properly, the connections literally aren't being made. And obviously that's going to affect your mental health and your ability to think straight about any of this, which is just extraordinary, isn't it? The way that we are, in my language, created and made, is to need some basic things. And if we don't get them, then this machine of our bodies just can't function properly. So I just wanted to kind of, I always remember that as a helpful thing, because learning about nutrition, learning about the basic things is something that we do on the course. And it's one of the really small steps that we take. So we talk a lot about baby steps. We talk a lot about, it's not like you're going to wake up overnight. It's to do with learning, understanding, taking steps to understand what's happened. And what you said earlier about, oh, you'd have a long gap and then you do some of the unhelpful behavior again, and beat yourself up. And I'm like, actually, you had a long gap. Let's look at that long gap. And it's a bit, we'd call them baby steps, because babies, or training steps. If you're a baby learning to walk, you don't expect a baby to just get up and be able to walk. If you're training to do something, you don't expect to be able to do it on your first week of training. It's that principle that is so important. And I actually think that's also relevant to the fullness of life journey, because it is a journey. There's always more. There's always more freedom. It's not like you arrive at a state. There is always more, further up and further in. There's always more that freedom that Jesus wants to lead us into. And I think that if you are struggling with eating issues, I think it's almost like, number one, bring all the things that are getting in the way of asking for God's help to him, or talk to someone, or pray with someone about it. So I would always say that number one is, if you're feeling the shame thing, if you're feeling like somebody, spoken unhelpful words over you, and people don't mean to be unhelpful. They think they're saying helpful things, but sometimes it feels like being hit around the head with a wet fish, because this is not helpful to be told that you're sinful every day, or whatever. The whole point of repentance is repentance about turning around and going a different direction. So bring all those difficult things to Jesus first of all, and say, I don't know how to deal with these. How do I deal? That's your starting place. I don't even know how to start, but I do know that you are the word. You have the words of eternal life. You have the words, so you can help me start, and find someone to walk alongside you. It may or may not be a family member, because, like, I know that I said loads of things wrong and did things wrong, but I had to learn how to love my daughters in a different way, and deal with my own issues and all of that kind of stuff. It is bound to be messy. Fullness of life, I don't think, is clean and tidy. I think it's a mess. It's a messy journey, but it's where you're heading that is important. So actually find someone who loves and knows Jesus to talk to and to walk with you, who will be there and will stick with you, even on the days when you're, self-centered and horrible and lying and all of that kind of thing. That they understand that, they accept that, they're going to walk with you that day and the next day when you're feeling a bit better. All of that sort of roller coaster. And find a good Christian community that can accept you for where you are. I mean, I think we expect a lot of each other sometimes. And maybe we need to cut each other some slack, because we are all human. But you just need enough. You just need enough help just to know that there's someone you could phone, there's someone you could go for a walk with, there's even if it's just one person, you do need support.
Yeah.
And if that person is a Christian, then they can help you understand and start to help you walk into that fullness of life again as well. Obviously, I'm going to say, because we can't Taste Life Charity, and we know we have got a great tool in this community course. It is really strong. We know it works. We know it can be life-changing. It's been life-saving for many people. So yeah, get in touch with tastelifeuk.org. But it's finding what's right for you. But my plea, I suppose, is find something. You are worth it. And I know I sound like an advert, but you are you. There's no one like you. You are unique and wonderful and can bring something that literally no one else can bring. And it's exploring that. I think the opportunity within a crisis is always there. So the opportunity to embark on a journey of self-discovery, of how you can relate to other people. You talked earlier about, how eating disorders kind of squashed you, and take all of that away. And part of the journey of recovery is this amazing thing, discovering the nice things about you rather than, oh, I'm just getting everything wrong, or all of the beating up and all of that. Like I said, we all have stuff.
Yeah.
We all have stuff, and it's walking out of that. But find someone to walk with you, whoever that is, whether it's a counsellor. Just reach out and get the help you need.
There is help out there, as you say, and Taste Life, where Di Archer is the founder of, is worth checking out their website. It is definitely a place that's helped me, and I know many others, but also for people who, like yourself, Di, who are affected by it through a loved one as well. It's a huge part of our society, and we do need to be having conversations more about it. Tastelife.org. And just my final thought.
No. Tastelifeuk.org.
Tastelifeuk.org. And just the final thought from me on this, you mentioned that we expect a lot from each other, which is so true. And I have to say on that, something that I've learned, I recently got married. God's really blessed me in recent years. And on our honeymoon, we were discussing our life aims. And my husband said something that's really stuck with me. And we do bring it up on a regular basis. And it's around expectations and how we can mix them up with our life values and standards that we want to live by. And whilst it is good to have these standards and values, for me as a Christian, as a woman, it's, to love, to seek justice. You talked about the injustice of eating disorders, to serve my community in all these different areas. That's things that should be set in my life and I live by them. But my expectations, well, they're things that are movable. But if I treat my expectations like I do my standards and my values, then I'm going to be disappointed on a regular basis, not only by others, but by myself. Check your expectations on yourself. And part of my recovery is, because it's ongoing, to forgive myself and to say sorry and to learn to love myself again, which wasn't easy. But one of the best truths I've learned is you don't have to feel it to believe it. So I started to love myself before I felt like loving myself. I started to tell myself. I remember standing in front of the mirror and saying sorry and holding my tummy, which I've struggled with in particular, or my hips, and saying, I'm sorry, you're beautiful. And it sounds a bit weird maybe to you, but it helped me. And actually my feelings have caught up with something that I've decided to do because I saw the truth and the value of doing it. So as I say, Di, it's a constant learning journey. And what I love about Taste Life UK is that you are not only shining a light, you're able to bring beauty into something that is so painful. And you're also bringing people together. It's a community. And I think when you're in that place, whether it's yourself struggling or whether it's a loved one, you can feel so alone, but you're never alone. There's always somebody who is going through something similar in their own way, but also that want to support you and come alongside you and go along with you. And I really want to encourage you to check out tastelifeuk.org, the course that they run, but also for just even starting the conversation.
I just want to add a couple of things, because we also do, just so you know, we also do preventative stuff, because we would love young people to avoid eating disorders in the first place. So we have resources for schools and youth groups called the Youth Track, and we have just launched one called Food, Feelings and Faith, which is for young people in Christian contexts. And we're excited about that. It's just 3 sessions, and it puts the eating disorder prevention awareness within the context of Christian faith. So that's Food, Feelings and Faith. And we also do education. So if you want us to come and talk to you about eating disorders or do a seminar or workshop, we'd be very happy to hear from you. And we do have we've just launched our own podcast as well, Helen, called Back to the Table, launched by Taste Life UK. And we've got 6 episodes on there from different, talking about different ages, talking about different eating disorders, all from people who have been there, got the T-shirt on the journey to recovery. So sports, all sorts. Have a look at those as well.
Back to the Table is the name of that podcast. And as you said earlier, Di, stories are what stick with us and help us to understand and explore life. So do check it out. tastelifeuk.org, where Di Archer, my guest for this week's Life Issues, is the co-founder. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me.